Hi and hello everybody, it's Fern. Welcome back to another Planty video. Thank you so much for joining me for this substrate chat. So I figured that I would do a dedicated video talking about the different substrates that I use to grow my plants, why I choose particular substrates for certain plants, what I put in my DIY mixes. Is just going to be a big general overview because I do get a lot of questions of why did you choose to put that plant in that substrate. I've also been gravitating more to semi-hydro, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit and just try to break everything down as best as I can. So I hope that this will be helpful for you. Or oh my gosh, I just about knocked this off the table. Can you imagine? I would cry. Anywho, I hope this will be helpful or at least just enjoyable to listen to. I don't know. Okay, so the main substrates that I use in my plant collection currently are a chunky aroid mix, which I am currently using Molly's aroid mix. I've been using that for actually a few years now, I feel. Like it's been a while. That's been like my go-to pre-mixed, like store-bought soil. I do also have a DIY general mix, or I call it like my simple DIY mix, that I've also been using for a few years now. I have my DIY begonia mix, which is similar to that one, but a little bit different. So it's kind of like an offset of my simple DIY mix, but I like to use it for begonias and thirstier plants that just need something a little bit more dense. And then I use LECA and I use PON. And also, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I do use a specific cactus and succulent mix for my cactus and succulents. I also use the one from Very Plants, the Molly's, I think it's just called Molly's cactus mix. I'll touch on that, but I'm not going to talk about that a lot just because I don't have a ton of cactus and succulents. So when it comes to deciding what substrate I'm going to be using for a plant, it depends on the plant's needs, but it also very heavily depends on my needs, my care style. That is a huge factor. Are you a more hands-on plant parent? Do you tend to overwater? Or are you on the other end of the spectrum where you like to be very set and forget, hands off? You only want to be topping up with water like once a week max. It really depends on just what's going to work for you. And it also, another factor that's just kind of random but is a factor, is just what I have on hand. Because sometimes, I mean more recently, if you've been watching my videos, I've been putting a lot of my plants in my simple DIY mix when I would rather put them in my Molly's aroid mix, but I just don't have it on hand right now. So sometimes you just have to work with what you have. Okay, so first we are going to talk about Molly's aroid mix. It is my go-to for when I want something chunky and airy. I just find it easy to buy a pre-made mix, but yes, you can replicate something like this at home if you are game to purchase all the different ingredients. For me, I was having a lot of trouble. I think it's maybe more accessible now, but I was just having a lot of trouble finding ingredients here in Canada. That's the main reason why I started using Molly's, and my plants really love it, so I've just continued to use it over the years. But you totally can attempt to recreate your own. I'm even thinking of maybe doing that sometime in the second half of this year, purchasing some of the ingredients and seeing like how my DIY chunky mix compares to my favorite store-bought one. But overall, I think that it's really great. It has, it's soilless as well, which is more sustainable, so I appreciate that. It is coconut core, coconut chips, there's like chunky perlite, there's LECA, there's bark. It is very nice. And it's difficult to overwater because it is just so light and airy. Like, you know, your roots are going to be getting a lot of aeration. So I tend to gravitate towards this for chunkier root systems like an anthurium, monstera. I tend to reach for this for a lot of my alocasia as well, even philodendron. Pothos would love it, but pothos aren't fussy, so I tend to put them in my DIY pretty often just because they don't care. One of the cons is of course the cost. It's more expensive to buy a pre-made mix, so that's another thing that I have to kind of keep in mind. If something like a pothos or, you know, a philodendron micans can tolerate a different substrate, or just like my DIY substrate, then I might put it in that instead and save my Molly's aroid mix for my fussier plants. Also not an aroid, but I find that my Hoya love Molly's aroid mix, so I try to prioritize giving it to them as well. I don't know, they just really, really love it. The roots go crazy in it. I think I have this guy in Molly's, yeah. So it's nice and chunky there. I think they really appreciate the airiness of it, especially these thicker leaved Hoyas. The thin leaf, like the multiflora, the campanulata, you might want to do something a little bit more dense, but for the most part, my Hoya just absolutely love it. So once I discovered that, I started putting a lot of them into Molly's, and I have had really, really great results from it. If you are putting something thirstier into it, even some of my anthurium, I really have to prioritize being on top of watering, because water will kind of just go through this a lot quicker than, oh, this is holding my light up. Just a second here. I have my light mounted, this light mounted on my Cebu Blue, but this one is, now I lost my train of thought. What was I saying about this? That a denser mix like this needs to be watered less often, I guess. Like this is gonna hold a lot more moisture than this super chunky mix. Yeah, I think that was my point. So if you know that a plant is gonna be more thirsty, like a thinner leafed Hoya, for example, then you might want something that is gonna just have a bit better retention. There really is just so many different factors that go into it. And when I do my repots, I'll try to make an intention of talking through why specifically I chose certain. I feel like I mention it sometimes, but maybe I'm not sharing my thought process all the time. So that's something for me to keep in mind. But yeah, I would not put, for example, a begonia in Molly's aroid mix. Anything that has a higher water need, you're not gonna wanna put in something that chunky. It is very convenient to use. I do think it's high quality. It's inoculated with mycorrhizae, so you're getting some of that beneficial fungus in here as well. You do have to fertilize though, because it is soilless, so you're gonna want to have a good fertilizing routine if you go for Molly's aroid mix, or if you create your own soilless chunky mix. So that's no problem for me because I fertilize pretty frequently anyways. But yeah, I think that it is a fantastic mix. That is my thoughts on it. That is some of the plants that I use this mix for. Overall, I think it's really great, very convenient for me as well, especially when some of these ingredients are harder to come by or just like pricey to purchase as well. I think if you live in the US, some of the ingredients might be more readily available at a reasonable price, but it is a bit trickier up here. So I'm glad that I have this as an option, and it kind of simplifies things for me, which is nice. Okay, I'm trying to find example plants from around me. Yeah, this is my regular DIY mix. So I am very lazy when it comes to just creating a simple DIY mix for my plants. Now, like I said, this is something that I use when I don't have Molly's on hand, when there's a plant that just doesn't need to be in something as complicated, complex as Molly's, or my plants that are a little bit thirstier, like I said, my thinner leafed Hoya. I noticed that this Nicholsoniae New Guinea Ghost was just quite thirsty. It was drying out all the time. So this one is just in a simple DIY mix. It's only 3 ingredients. If you are a regular viewer, then you've probably seen me make this before because I've been using it for a few years now. But the base is ProMix HP, which is a soil with some perlite, and it also has mycorrhizae in it as well. I find it to be fairly cost effective, even better if you can get it on sale. You can find it at garden centers, big box store. I just buy a big bag and it usually lasts for a while. And then I add, like I said, it has some perlite, but I like to add some additional perlite to make it even fluffier. And then I also add some orchid bark, which is just pine bark, just to add like a little bit of chunk to it, you know? The nice thing about this is that you can kind of customize it to how you want it. You can add more bark or less bark, more perlite or less. You can even add extra things. Like I said, mine is very just like bare bones, but sometimes I will, like if I have something else on hand that I want to throw in, I will add pumice or charcoal, whatever I kind of have. But yeah, this is what it looks like. So it looks a lot more dense, but as you can see, there's a lot of perlite in there and some of the bark. So it's actually not like, I think it's very middle of the road. I do have a more moisture retentive mix, which we will get to next. But this one is a very good, just general mix for, like, I can pretty much put any plant in this mix and it will be fine as long as I adjust my watering accordingly. Works for Hoya. I do think they prefer mollies, but they can grow fine in here as well, as you can see. Works for pothos, philodendron. I also have anthurium in this. Like, it's not fancy, but you can make it work. Yeah, like, I think it's a solid mix. Is it like the bougiest thing around? No, but I think it is a fine option and very cost effective as well. Of course, since it is more dense than my mollies, I am careful not to really overpot plants in it, whereas I might be more lenient if I was using my chunky aroid mix. But I try not to overpot and I try not to overwater. Like, I will check and see, is it actually dry before I just go ahead and dump more water in. Like anything though, with experience, you kind of learn like what the care routine is and what it's like maintaining plants in all these different substrates. I've been collecting plants for like 8 years now, and I know my plants well enough that I'm very good at predicting when they're going to be thirsty. I've just gotten used to anticipating things and to, like, it feels second nature to pick out a pot size, pick out a substrate. It's just something that comes with time and experience. Okay, I was finished filming this DIY soil section, but I'm coming back because I kind of feel like I was selling it short a little bit, and just, I don't know, I just want you guys to know that you don't have to have a fancy soil mix or an expensive soil mix to grow your plants really well. For example, some of my best plants, like this one, my variegated alocasia dragon scale, are just in my basic Pro Mix HP, perlite, and pine bark mixture. There's so much more that goes into plant care than just the substrate. I do think that the substrate is very important, but because I got the pot size right, I have the lighting conditions right, and I have my watering routine locked in, this plant is thriving in this mix. So I don't know, I had already moved on to a different section, and then I was like, I don't want people to think like, oh, I have to invest in this expensive chunky mix, because you don't. Do I prefer to put some of my plants in a nice chunky mix? Yes. But do I also have plants that are thriving in this very basic mix? Yes, I do. So yeah, I just had to come back and make sure that was clear. Like, this one is obviously living its absolute best life. And honestly, when I repot this, I don't even know if I will switch it to mollies because it's just been doing so well in here. So yeah, I just had to come back and say that. Okay, and then, like I said, I do have an offset of my DIY mix, and that is my begonia mix. Now, I used to put a lot more of my begonias in this mix, but I have since been moving a lot of my begonias into semi-hydro because they're just very thirsty plants. But I do think that this is a really solid and simple mix for begonias or other thirsty plants. Like, what else would I put in this? My oxalis, probably. Mostly begonias. I don't really have any other plants that are like, maybe a calathea I would use this for as well. Just anything that needs that extra bit of moisture retention. Because if you put a thirsty plant with a fine root system like this into a chunky mix, it's just not, like, you're gonna have a nightmare of a time trying to keep up with watering. So this is the Pro Mix HP again as a base. And then I just add vermiculite. Like, I don't even really add any extra perlite anymore to the begonia mix. I just use the perlite that's already in the Pro Mix HP, and I add vermiculite because vermiculite retains water. So it's really helpful for these guys. And of course, anything that you're adding in just makes the texture like a little bit more fluffy, which is great. Vermiculite is my go-to when it comes to begonia mixes. I don't really use it for much else, or maybe I've used it for pings before, question mark, but I keep it on hand almost entirely for my begonias. They love it. So it's either this mix that I go for or semi-hydro for these guys. My more terrarium type begonia as well, this is the mix that I use for them. But like I said, I don't know how often I'm gonna be using this mix going forward because I am just finding semi-hydro to be even more helpful for my begonias and my thirstier plants. So just touching on cactus and succulents, I do typically use a pre-mixed option. I've used a local one, and then I've used the Molly's cactus mix, which is a very rocky, fast draining mix. That's what I have several of my cactus and succulents in right now. I did also use a DIY mix for some of these. Maybe if you watch my cactus and succulent repot, from last year, I think that I just did Pro Mix HP with a lot of perlite in it to make it really well draining. And that's been fine. It's just not my favorite. I really prefer to just buy a pre-made one because I don't have very many cactus and succulents. I'm like, I might as well just purchase what is going to be best for them. I do think that the more specialty ones are better, like the Molly's, or another one that I used was from like a specialty cactus and succulent nursery that's local to me. And I say that because I've used some store-bought cactus and succulent mixes in the past, just from like the big box store, and I didn't have a great experience with them. I don't think that they are well draining enough, but I haven't used them in a while, so maybe they've changed, I don't know. Also, again, I just can't emphasize how much your care methods, your environment, like how humid is it in your home, how hot is it in your home, what type of pot are you using. This is a rare terracotta pot in my collection because I know I'm an underwaterer, so I don't typically use terracotta for my plants anymore. This was an exception because it's a cactus, but if you're using something like terracotta, you're gonna need to be watering more often. It's more porous, it's drying out, opposed to plastic nursery pots that are gonna be keeping a lot of that moisture locked in. So there's just so many things that are at play besides just the mix that you're using. So LECA was my nemesis for many years. I couldn't seem to figure it out. I actually think that one of the main reasons I had so many casualties when I first tried using LECA, and when I would attempt to use LECA at different times over the first few years of my plant journey, I think the reason it wasn't working out for me was because I was transferring plants from soil into LECA, and then they would die on me. Their roots would go mushy. It was just bad news bears. But now I always make sure that my plants have an in-between water rooting phase. I don't really, well, maybe I rarely do it, but most of the time I stick my plants into water for a few weeks, let them adapt, grow some water roots, then I move them into LECA, and I am seeing so much more success. In fact, I think I am almost always having success now, which is really nice. I just wasn't doing that before, and I know that some people don't. Some people just wash all the soil off the roots, stick them in semi-hydro, and they're fine. But that just wasn't working for me. So now that's why I do this kind of like roundabout way of getting my plants into LECA. Anywho, I'm sure that most of you have seen LECA by now, but if you haven't, it is these clay pebbles. They're very porous, so they are able to wick up moisture and bring that up to your plant's roots. I like LECA because since it's these like larger sized clay balls, I feel like it offers the root system more oxygen than pon, which can be a little bit more compacted. One of the main things that inspired me to try LECA again was Brandon from Philip Brandon's LECA guide. If you are a beginner to LECA, you want to have like a comprehensive guide slash overview of how to use it, I will link his video down below in my description box because it was so helpful to me, and it just gave me that inspiration and motivation to try LECA again, because I'd see people growing LECA and I was like, oh my gosh, like that sounds so nice. It's lower maintenance. It is reusable. Like it just sounds so good, but it wasn't working for me. So I watched that, followed his advice, also started making sure that my plants had that transition period, and I started having a lot of success, and now I'm absolutely loving LECA. So you can grow pretty much any plant in LECA. I've even seen people grow cactus and succulents in LECA. What makes me put a plant in LECA? I will put plants in LECA if they're really thirsty, or if it's just any plant that I want to be lower maintenance. So I have a lot of my climbers in LECA now for my moss poles. I have, who else do I have in LECA? When I'm starting a new plant from cuttings, I will often opt to go for LECA because I'm already rooting them in water, so then it's really easy to just start them in LECA. It's very low maintenance, especially the way that I use it, because I use these self-watering pots. This particular one isn't my favorite. I use a few different types of pots. I have like this style as well, but they all kind of function the same, honestly, and all you have to do is keep the water topped up. You don't want it to be like, this one's gonna need to be topped up soon because it's almost at that very bottom line, and I try not to let my semi-hydro plants run like completely dry, because then you can risk dry rot. But it's so easy to maintain because you just walk over and add some water, and you don't have to worry about it like running out the bottom and making a mess. It's like a self-contained thing. Very straightforward, very easy care. You do need to be fertilizing these though. That is important because there's no nutrients in LECA. So I usually fertilize every watering, and then like the odd one I will just give plain water, but I'm usually adding fertilizer. You are also supposed to, like, best practice is to flush these out every once in a while with tap water. By tap water, I just meant plain water with no fertilizer in it. I know in other places people can't use tap water, so I'm just saying tap water because I use tap water for my plants, but I just mean plain water without anything added to it. So if that's filtered water for you, then just plain filtered water, which I can't really do with this type of pot because there's no insert. This one, I could just take the insert out and flush this through in the sink or in the shower, but to be honest with you, I just don't do that very often. I really don't. This is so pretty. Like, look at how much this plant is growing. It's so bushy now. My Hoyalima. Yeah, I could definitely be better about flushing, but the plants are still all doing fine, honestly. So my main reason for gravitating towards LECA lately is just that the maintenance is very simple, very straightforward, quick to do. They also typically don't dry out as quickly as my soil plants, so I'm not having to water them as often, like as frequently. So overall, it's just less work. And as I mentioned, you can reuse, like it's reusable, which is really nice. So when I do a repot, I just put my used LECA into a pot and I boil that on the stove for like 20 minutes. And then it's all sanitized. I store it away after that and it's ready to be reused again, which is really cool. So once you purchase it, then you can just keep using it for different plants, which is great. I also find LECA to just be less tedious than pond. Pond can be really annoying when you have a bunch of roots to pull out of it, because it's like tiny little small rocks, but LECA is larger pieces, so I find it easier to tease out of roots and just less messy to do repots. So yeah, I've really been enjoying it lately. It's also cheap to buy. You can buy LECA from like IKEA. That's where I've been getting mine. When we're at IKEA, I will just grab a couple of bags to stock up. Oh, also, I do want to touch on the mini LECA that I have, because that's something that has been a relatively recent thing that I've started using this year. And I started using mini LECA to experiment with some of my like finer rooted plants. As you can see, I'm using it for my Hoyalima here. And she is very much enjoying it. She's coming off of her trellis because she's growing so much. And she's also going to be flowering for me soon, which is very exciting. So, the mini LECA has been a hit. I also have an anthurium, a small anthurium in mini LECA, and I have a begonia in mini LECA. So I've just been testing it out and it's been going well for me, honestly. I did have one plant that didn't take, but it was a begonia and they can just be a little bit more finicky, so I don't necessarily think it was the LECA's fault. But yeah, it's just nicer to have like a mini option. And y'all ask me where I get it. I get it from Optimized Organics, but last I checked they were sold out. So I will have everything linked down below in the description though for you to check out. But yeah, it's very, very handy. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on that. I can do a whole video on LECA if you want me to go more into depth, maybe take you along on my care routine, maybe do a repot into LECA so you can really see it in action, see my thought process, and just get like a more in-depth video on it. I would definitely be happy to do that. Now that LECA is going well for me, I'm like, okay, maybe I can talk about this more and share my thoughts more. And then the last thing I have to talk about is PON. So very similar in care to LECA. This is my Hoya UT039 Flores Island, which has been living in PON for a couple of years now. I think since I got this plant, I've just kept it in PON. And it's been super, super happy in here. And it's been very low maintenance for me as well. It's in the same pot as the Syngonium I was just holding. But yeah, it's just like a smaller, rockier, semi-hydro appropriate substrate. You can even use this not a semi-hydro. Like I've seen people use PON as a substrate that you just water like you would soil. It's not how I've ever used it, but you can use it in different ways. Now I typically make my own PON mix with pumice, oh gosh, what's in it again? Zeolite and lava rock, I believe. I bought, in like 2020, I bought massive bags of these things and I have just been using it since. It looks like that. I do have a video on my channel of my DIY PON recipe and it's still the same recipe that I use all of these years later. However, I just don't use it as often anymore now that I've gotten into LECA, because as I mentioned, I just find LECA less finicky to work with, less finicky to remove from roots. And as I mentioned, I feel like PON can like just be more compact and not as aerated sometimes. Like I have had some roots die in PON and I think that it's just like, I don't know, it's just more dense. My mix definitely isn't the fanciest. It's just what I have access to and what I've been using. I've never used Lechuza, which is like the OG. Never used that, but I have used Crystal Stars. I think it's called Mineral Magic Mix. And I actually really liked that mix, but I just ran out of it. So I've just been using my DIY and yeah, I mean, it's an option that I have, but it's not really something that I've actively been potting into. I think I really only have a few plants. Right now I have a couple Hoya. My Florida Ghost, the one that's on the wall, is in PON. And I think that's pretty much it. Like I just have not been gravitating towards it. So that's kind of my current relationship with it, but it is easy to maintain. It's a good option. It, I think you also don't have to flush it as much as LECA because of the, I don't know, the properties of the rocks aren't as prone to the mineral buildup, or they're good at like counteracting it or something. I honestly have no idea. I just heard that you don't need to flush it like as much as you have to flush LECA, but that really doesn't apply to me because I don't really flush anything anyways. I do the rare time, but it's just not in my like regular routine. If I really feel like going the extra mile one day, then I will flush. But yeah, again, you can use PON for pretty much any plant. And yeah, I mean, I don't have any major qualms with it. It's more so just annoying to use compared to LECA, so yeah. So I think that's pretty much all of the substrates, apart from like sphagnum moss, which I don't really keep plants in sphagnum moss at all, like long term. Cuttings will be in sphagnum moss maybe sometimes. Like I have some of my newer plants from Plant Haven Toronto, they're in sphagnum moss right now. And I use moss for my moss poles, of course, but as a growing substrate, I don't ever like plant into moss. Oh, and then I do have my carnivorous plants. That's a whole other story though, and I do have carnivorous plant specific videos that you can go check out if you're interested. But I mean, I guess the short answer is that I use, again, a pre-mixed carnivorous soil from Brad's greenhouse and PON as like my bottom layer in here. But yeah, I do have dedicated videos on these guys. So I hope that this was helpful, or at least just nice to listen to. I don't know. When I notice that I'm getting a lot of questions about something, then it prompts me to want to make a video talking about that thing more. And I have been getting a lot of questions of people asking like how I choose my substrates and all the different things that I use and such. So yeah, I guess that's all that I have to say. Let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. I would love to hear them. I would also love to hear what your go-to substrate is. Are you a semi-hydro grower? Are you a soil grower? Do you grow in a mix like me? I feel like it's so me to be growing in like a million different substrates, but it just is what it is. It's what works for me. And yeah, anywho, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.